This is my concept map view of the layered article. The key point was entropy, and it branches off into two primary things. There is the problematic view that they spent the first bit talking about, and the better view. The problematic view kind of builds into the general concept of disorder, which is most commonly associated with structural disorder by their point of view, um, where you have things arranged and it doesn't really account for everything. So it doesn't fully account for points where you end up with a lower entropy in a liquid structure than you do in a crystalline structure. Um, it can produce some misconceptions about what entropy actually is, since it is directly linked to structural disorder. And it can be a confusing foundation when something comes up that does not make sense because the model or the words you're using don't actually take into account what you're looking at. When everything must be structural disorder, and you have something that is more disordered but is structurally more ordered, it doesn't make sense if you're only thinking in terms of one thing. So the better view relies on a concept of macroscopic and microscopic states, using macroscopic to uh, paint a clear picture of the microscopic, since the microscopic tends to be harder to actually analyze. So the key thing that they wanted to look at was how things are packed, and they broke it down into two examples. The first was a suitcase. So they looked at if you had a suitcase empty, you can just throw all of the stuff in the suitcase. You have a ton of different states that the stuff can be arranged in, which that high number of different states would mean that there is a higher entropy because there are so many ways that the things could end up that there's no real ability to predict how they did end up. Versus with a full suitcase, the number of ways you can actually pack all of the stuff in the suitcase and have it fit is significantly reduced, meaning your ability to predict positions and how things are actually arranged becomes way higher, which means your entropy is significantly lower because there's a lot fewer states. The other example they had was looking at a candy dish, um, or they suggested using like ball bearings. The idea being that you can shake it and it will create alignment, or as you shaking, in this case being a representation of temperature, temperature being a model of the movement of particles. So the other idea is you can add more particles, increasing the density, which would in turn increase the formation of crystals. They specifically point out that once you hit a certain point, you end up with hexagonal shapes that just won't break down regardless of how much you shake it, which would point to a freezing point entropy, and you end up with that entropy point where the thing is starting to freeze is actually below the maximum density. You could keep adding candy to the dish, but you've already frozen and your entropy is now changed. You've hit a lower entropy in a crystalline structure, which is how you would normally think of it, but you're still hitting it in a somewhat liquid state before you fully crystallized. And that is the main points that they brought up.